Okay, well, I don't know whether it was my favourite ever punk moment, but one that was incredibly personal to me and made me feel, in a small way, a bit part of, I guess, a punk movement, but although we didn't call it punk at the time, but a kind of irreverent movement, was modelling for Alexander McQueen in his 1994 Banshee show. It was autumn-winter 1994. And it was held at the Café de Paris, and he asked me to wear a kind of molded plaster breastplate, which was sort of like a corset, was sort of built on chicken wire, so it was incredibly uncomfortable. Um, Pre the days of McQueen having any money whatsoever, and it was sort of caked in white plaster of Paris, which had obviously dried on the chicken wire and was kind of crumbling at the neck, and at the bottom of it, it came right down over my hips, and had these enormous bosoms on it, which weren't mine. It hadn't been molded on me. I don't know quite what it had been molded on. It might have been kind of a Boadicea statue or something. But he wanted me to wear it because I have quite a long neck, and this thing had quite a long neck. It came right the way up my throat to my chin, and so I turned up to the show not knowing what I would be wearing. It was Katie England who'd called me, who had just started to be his stylist. So it felt like quite a movement of kind of interesting people collaborating around him, and obviously Isabella was there, and I think she modelled in the show, and it just I wanted to do it because I knew him from college, and I'd been modelling for him in the MA room in front of Louise when he had crits and things. So they would pull me in, not necessarily for him, for all the students. There were a few of us that were tall and lean, and we were kind of like the MA house models, if you like. So I kind of knew him from there, and we got on, and he was great. And he was obviously, even back then, doing something rather really different. So this was his third show after his MA show, and Katie was then involved. And I arrived backstage. I didn't know what I was going to wear, and he said, "Oh, I want you to wear this." And I sort of looked at it, and my heart fell slightly. And anyway, and then I put it on, and it was kind of amazing on, I have to say. And underneath, I wore this sort of very flimsy, white, drapey, Roman-esque kind of gown, I guess. And this on top, and my hair, all the model's hair was slicked down to one side with McQueen in silver branded on our heads. And I remember the makeup was quite haunting. We all looked very pale, and we had these sort of rosebuddy lips, and sort of hollowed out eyes. And I didn't quite know what I thought of him then. This was I had just graduated from college myself on a BA, so I was 22 or 23, and I thought there was something about him. It was the collaborations he had with these people who were very important, because to my mind, looking at the clothes, which had in some cases latex splattered on them, locusts splattered into them, almost as if they'd been hit by a car windscreen. I was sort of slightly frightened by the clothes, and I think that was the impression that a lot of fashion journalists got in the beginning, that he was some sort of misogynist and that he didn't like women at all, which wasn't my experience of him at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. But I just it was irreverence that he was showing. It was such an almighty fuck you to the industry at large, that somebody had the temerity to put these things called bumpsters on the catwalk and have models striding down them with no, with their arses hanging out, essentially, was felt like a mini revolution, and was indeed, a punk moment in the purest sense, that it was bold, complete irreverence. And, in the show that I modelled in, he had a pregnant skinhead storm the catwalk in kind of like this completely transparent black floor-length gown. So he was showing the world a very different view of women, and it upset a lot of people. And I guess that's why it upset, and it also excited, because it was so different, because it was so new, because there was an energy that sort of drilled into you when you sat there and watched his shows subsequently. So I think it was a pure, proper punk moment.
I love how you described, that energy and that irreverence, and it's so interesting to me that you said when you saw what you were going to be wearing, your heart fell a little bit, but then when you put it on, you kind of almost understood it. Did you find that energy and that spirit came through in you when you were wearing his clothes, and you felt, involved in this punkish kind of moment?
Yeah, I mean, I just remember it being such a scene backstage with Isabella Blow there and Plum Sykes, and just sort of cool people that were all the sort of people that you wanted to hang out with in fashion, and him being so sort of dedicated to what he was doing, with no money, with he was like a magnet, and he'd drawn all these great people together. So the atmosphere backstage was really quite electric, even before we'd gone out. And I remember I had to lie down in this corset thing, because it was rather heavy, and I couldn't sit in it because it came below my hip, so I couldn't bend at the hip to sit. So I had to lie down in it, which was quite amusing, amongst all these people wandering around, and they were very sweet, feeding me Coca-Cola through a straw. But yeah, and then when we went out, I mean, that's a bit of a blur, because I was terrified, obviously, and it was just, you could feel the audience, the electricity coming off the audience, and actually when you're on stage, and even with the music playing, you can actually hear what people say. I can't remember what it was exactly, but I remember people. I was slightly embarrassed that people recognised me, but that's my second outfit. I had two outfits, and the second one was a pair of bumpsters, and that's what I was quite worried that people were pointing at me and laughing at my bum. But
I think that's what I'm interested that you picked McQueen, but from such a personal perspective, because McQueen, for the kind of exact reasons that you just said, is someone that is always associated with punk. But I love that you can describe, that sense of sort of almost fear when wearing his clothes that translated to fear that people felt when they were receiving them. And do you think that is what made him so exciting, and what means that people always identify with him with punk, is fashion, the way that he made fashion something that could make people feel uncomfortable? Because that's a very powerful thing to be able to do.
yeah, totally. He made you think, whichever show you saw, and they weren't all brilliant, They weren't all brilliant. Some were more brilliant than others. But he always made you think about what, about something a little bit more profound. But always, it will I think he wanted to unseat people in the beginning. I think he had a desperate urge to unseat people and shock, and nobody else had the guts to do that at the time, and nobody else had that vision of women, which was frightening. He was the king of making a spectacle, you know, and absolutely forever throughout his career, wherever he showed, if it was Givenchy or McQueen, the king of putting on a show. And I think he used that, his, if you can call it that, a kind of punk nature to do so. You know, the way the music would always build up as a kind of hum or a throb, or it was never music. When people were taking their seats, there was a noise that sort of drilled into you, you know, that made you sort of vibrate a bit. And so he built up this crescendo of expectancy of something raw and powerful that was going to happen, and generally it did. He wanted to knock the white middle classness out of fashion, I think.
And that's incredibly punk.
Yeah, totally. It's irreverence and pure kind of adrenal. You know, it was like visceral sitting at those shows or being part of those shows. It was like your heart was in your mouth. And nobody else has been able to ever pull that kind of emotion out of clothes since. I don't think.